A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, and back in here with another quick, and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's topic, I wanted to read through one of the prayers by the prophet Jeremiah. And there was a particular verse that stuck out in my mind, being amongst brothers, because, with, in terms of comfort, within, this world is not really something that, we have. Right, we don't have comfort, within the dainties of this world, right? We don't, there's nothing, in this world, of course, we use the world and not abuse it, right? But when it comes to true, comfort, we don't actually experience that within, operating this world, right? Because you understand that the world is corrupt, right? And it's run by base people, right? The scriptures say that an unwise king, destroyeth his people, right? And not just the people, but, the different resources that you essentially you depend on for everyday life, right? So what happens is when you have more wisdom, you tend to experience a lot more grief, and it changes your countenance, and you become a lot more you can become a lot more irritable. Sometimes you just want to be by yourself, and not deal with people, because what happens is the things that you want to speak on is not the same things they speak on, right? Their conversation, right? Or rather, when you go into that word conversation, it refers to a manner of life. Their conversation is on a very different frequency, than yours, right? That's why why it says in Peter's about the Lot was vexed with the filthy, conversations, with the wicked, right? So that same vexation, we're experiencing that. Right, and that's sometimes you just want to really and truly you just want to be by yourself. You just want to depart, right? Just it doesn't people say certain things and it irritates you, right? So I wanted to read through this prayer in the Amplified, and I thought it would just be something that might be a bit comforting, because the prophets they experience this, right? And I'll just read it, and Lord's will, as always, this lesson would be edifying, right? I don't want to ramble too much. And it says here, Jeremiah 15 verse 15. And the title, it says here, Jeremiah's prayer and the Most High's answer. And it says, "O Lord Yahweh, you know and understand." I'm reading in the Amplified. And it says, "You know and understand. Remember me thoughtfully. Take notice of me. Take vengeance for me on my persecutors. Do not, in view of your patience, take me away. Know that for your sake I endure continual rebuke and dishonor," right? And I wish I spoke about that in some of the Gospels. A prophet, is without honor, I should say, is without honor amongst his own kin and amongst his own household, right? Because people think that you might be crazy. They looked at him like, whence has this man got all this wisdom? You know what I'm saying? They look at you different because your countenance changes. You know what I'm saying? Your the things that you speak on is vastly different from how they actually remember you. They realize there's a different change about you, and they can't really and fully explain it. So what did they do? They rebuke, they mock, right? Oh, yeah, that's Joseph's son, right? So the same thing they did to Hawashai, the same thing they're gonna do to the prophets, right? So this is verse 16 here, and it says, "Your words were found. I'm sorry, and I ate them." Right? And it says, "And your words became joy to me, and the delight of my heart. For I have been called by your name, O Lord, Yahweh, power of hosts. I sit not with the group of those who celebrate, nor did I rejoice. I sat alone because your powerful hand was upon me, and you filled me with the indignation at their sin." Right? So and it shows you the difference in the mentality of the people of the world versus the state that you're in. It's like it says in Ecclesiastes, you have the difference. You have the house of mourning, and then you have the house of mirth, right? So now you have all these different soccer games going on in different countries over the West, right? And different countries participating from Europe and Africa and the Americas, South Americas, and so on and so forth, all taking place. So you start to see that there's a lot of people, actually celebrating, representation, right? But it's basically the old trick that used to go on during the Roman Empire of what they would call it, bread and circus, right? So, bread and circus was a term. I believe I forgot who was the name of the poet that came. I think his name was it Juvenal, if I'm not mistaken, right? But there was a poet or a writer that came up with this mindset of bread and circus, where you push a lot of entertainment, food and entertainment, and basically it helps to keep the people distracted from the evils, from the war, from the increasing debt, from the gas prices, from the different things that will cause them to basically band together and actually revolt, right? So because that those two tactics, whether it's food and entertainment, those two put together, helps to divert the mind, right? It helps to divert the mind, especially from the Lord, right? So our people don't understand the different tactics by that's being laid out by their enemies, right? Especially Esau, right? Esau is very good with his legislation, so he's pushes out legislation, and our people are not basically illuminated in regards to what's going on really behind the scenes, because they're in that mindset of those who celebrate constantly. If there's anything our people love specifically, it's definitely a good time, right? So I'll read that again. So it says here, "I sat alone because your powerful hand was upon me, and you filled me with the indignation at their sin." Let me get that word. Let me go to the etymology. Hold on. So it says fury. In the etymology, it says rage, disrespect, displeasure, unworthy, worthy, proper, fitting, to take, accept. Dignus means worth. In means not. So it says it was a common American way to express popular outrage by passing and publishing resolutions, right? So basically it was a feeling of rage, right? Because we the scriptures say the eyes of the Lord upon the sinful kingdom, right? So we see we see the right way of how things are supposed to be, And when those things and the ways of the Lord are not honored, you know, it fills us with anger, because it ultimately it vexes you, right? Because those ways are not implemented upon the planet Earth, right? Especially, from the rulers that be, right? So what happens is, it tends to be more, because you have that understanding and you understand the Lord and his ways and so on and so forth, it creates a separation, so people are less going to likely to understand the way, how things are supposed to be, right? Because really what you have today is a bunch of people who have their own vain opinions, right? They have all their own opinions of how things should be, rather than how the way and the Most High actually set things up to be, right? The Most High's ways are not in the ways of these people, right? So this is verse 18 here, and it says, "Why is my pain been perpetual and my wound incurable, refusing to be healed? Will you indeed be to me like a deceptive brook with water that is unreliable?" It says, "Therefore saith the Lord Yahweh Bashem El Shah to Jeremiah, if you repent and give up this mistaken attitude of despair and self-pity, I will restore you into a state of inner peace, so that you stand before me as my obedient representative. If you separate the precious from the worthless, examining yourself and cleansing your heart from the unwarranted doubt concerning my faithfulness, you will become my spokesman." Right? So, the Lord made a separation, right, between him and, those people. And it says here, "Let the people turn to you and learn to value my values," right? Because that's really the ways, that's really how our people get accustomed to the ways of the Lord, is really through his spokesman, really is through his prophets and his priests, really, because they are the ones that were responsible, for actually teaching our people the what is unclean, versus what is holy, but our people, dislikes they dislike the Heavenly Father's ways through his servants, the prophets, because because this book is supposed to correct them and actually supposed to set them on the right path, but they don't like that. Scriptures say that, Yahweh Shai said it, men love darkness rather than light, because as a matter of fact, let me read it. Let me just read it. John 3. This is John 3, verse 19, and it says, "This is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, and neither come to the light, lest their deeds should be reproved," right? So that's why people, that's what that goes back into that separation again, because sometimes, speaking for myself from experience, you can just walk into a room and you could see the shift in the air, why people they just have this feeling like they don't like you, because they feel an aura or an energy coming off of you. The Spirit of the Lord, it might be so heavy to the point where you may not even say anything, and they feel condemned. They feel like, this person is judging me. Let me have to stay away from this person, because they know, and they know, because you may not know the actual deeds that they do in the darkness, they do in their own privacy of their own homes, right? But the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, right? Are 10,000 times brighter than the sun. So that Spirit of the Lord, it would it basically, they feel very what's the word? They feel exposed, right? When they come into your actual contact without you actually even knowing what their deeds might be. So people start to actually, they might bug out. They might actually start to, get angry at you. They might try to avoid you or whatever it is, right? Because ultimately their deeds are evil, right? And a lot of people, they can feel that, right? There's a scene in the word they talk about aura and vibes and stuff like that. They can feel that, right? They don't really know and fully understand what it is, but the Lord's, his presence is so heavy upon you, is where it's like, they can ultimately feel that they're being judged, right? So that's why they might keep their distance, right? So let me just finish up this here. This is Jeremiah 15 and 20, and it says, "And I will make you, this people, a fortified wall of bronze, and they will fight against you," just like I was reading earlier, right? And when you read in the chapters, after, speaking of those deeds, you had examples of our people. They were baking cakes, and the children were gathering wood, to basically bake cakes for the Queen of Heaven. So there was a lot of Queen of Heaven worship, during Jeremiah's time, right? So, those things, that which is then is now. So, like, how much more, in our time, you see our people's deeds, you know, and that Queen of Heaven worship, it basically just gets recycled into different facets, right? So, how Jake pedestalized women and stuff like that, you know, that idol worship takes different forms, right? Like birthdays, or these different holidays, that as unholy days, I should say, that they celebrate. These things displease the Lord, right? So oh, and then there was another chapter as well, where he was being mocked, but like there was a fire in his belly to basically continue to reprove our people, right? And it says here, and it says, continuing on, it says, "For they will not prevail over you, for I am with you always to save you and protect you, saith the Lord Yahweh. So I will rescue you out of the hand of the wicked, and I will redeem you from the grasping palm of the terrible and the ruthless tyrant," right? And that's what we need, right? King David said, "Deliver me, O Lord, from the wicked, which is thy sword," to roughly paraphrase, right? Because Esau, he was blessed with the sword, and he ultimately wants to basically persecute, he wants to, delete, he wants to make wrath with you Israelites, right? So, we need protection from not just Esau, but a lot of our own people as well, right? So, I just thought I would just read this, because it's only comfort amongst, brethren, when you gather together in unity, is where you actually feel basically a relief, a spiritual like relief. It's kind of like a spiritual oasis in a desert, right? Let me read this in Ecclesiasticus, one second. That is, one second. This is Sirach, or Ecclesiasticus, chapter 37, verse 12. And it says, but be continually with a godly man who knows to keep the commandments of the Lord, whose mind is according to thy mind, and who will sorrow with thee if thou shalt miscarry," right? So, only, godly men or spiritual men would fully have a grasp and understanding of your own, affliction, so to speak, right? So, anyways, I just thought I would just, read this, because that's one of the reasons we feel a lot of sorrow as well, because we feel, we want the Lord to basically remember us and save us, right? And it's not like we haven't sinned. We have sinned, right? And we're doing our best, and we strive to basically, as the scriptures say, offend less, right? So I just thought I would read Jeremiah's prayer, and Lord's will, this lesson was quick and edifying, right? So just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.